Hello, welcome. Thank you very much for coming to this live cast, this sort of redo, which hopefully will work a little better this time. Just a little bit of story behind this. I actually did a live cast about a week and a half ago. Some of you may have attended that one. And unfortunately, the video from that was actually lost by Kickstarter. It took them a while to get back to me and let me know that it was actually lost, but right away when I logged in to replay it, I only had the 3 minutes where I was scrabbling around with the camera beforehand and not actually the rest of it. So what I'm going to do in this live cast is I'm going to go through each of the books. This one here that I've got on the table is the Era of the Consortium Rulebook Primer, but I've got a huge stack of them just off camera over here. And I am going to show them all to you. I'm going to give you an idea of what each one has going for it and what the benefits are of one kind over another, and why on earth the definitive edition is better than the core rulebook and so on. I'm also then going to go through all of the existing expansions, and then I'm going to talk briefly about the upcoming expansions. Although I'm not going to have anything to show you because I haven't had any of those printed yet. I've been working hard on them today. So I'm going to start with the Era of the Consortium Rulebook Primer. Now this is the sort of the basic version of the book for anyone who wants it, but don't be fooled by that. The production values, which I'm so proud of in Era of the Consortium, have absolutely been maintained into this book with the layout done by Keith Draws. What this book offers is a sort of a limited view of the game in general, and what it's really designed for is as a sort of a player handbook or a guide for a GM who sort of wants to try out the game but isn't sure they want to commit for the entire rulebook. This comes to about £10. It's about 40 pages long, and I'm now going to go through what it contains. So it starts with the map of the Era of the Consortium solar systems. That is Sulis, Damara, and Ecaunus, all of which have very much got their place in the history as they explore. And I'm struggling to turn the page, sorry about that. We then go on to a quick section about the basics of the story. This is a 2-page summary of the entire 500 years of history, told from the perspective of Gweya, who is one of the main characters in the story. Now, it discusses a few of the things about the Kamaja, which was the first ship to launch from Earth, and also goes into a little bit of detail about what happened on the journey, at least a speculation of that, because no one really knows is the reality. And he sort of covers, in very brief terms, the history of the Consortium and talks about the formation of the Resistance and his own goals, because he's one of the most powerful characters in the Consortium. He runs one of the big 8. Now, it goes on after that to give you a quick summary of the current situation in 2 CE, which is the beginning of the time travel campaign. Now, I should say just at this stage, this Rulebook Primer is actually compatible with all of the expansions that we are creating. You need absolutely nothing more, with one exception, and that is the upcoming free trader, where we recommend, while you could play it with just this, we recommend that you have the core rulebook, because this book does not contain the space combat rules for Era of the Consortium. So we have a full briefing on the 2 CE situation, and I'll cover the time travel campaign books in a moment. And then we have a summary of the current situation for 447 CE, which is the end of the 500-year history in the core rulebook, and the point at which you will leap in if you want to play about the Resistance and the Consortium and their particular battle, if you want to play that. Next, we've got a few pages of the major factions, but not all of the factions. We've got Hayden Bank, which is the most powerful faction in the Consortium, the most powerful of the big 8. We've got Smertios Security, which is the company that most of the mooks work for. We've got Open Technology, who are not the most profitable company, but a very powerful one. We've got the Senate of the Consortium, which is the ruling body, which in theory controls the big 8, but in practice does not. And we've got a double page on the Resistance, because we feel that you do need to know all about those. And down at the bottom here of that, we've got a few bits of information about Stiletto Unit and Scimitar Unit, 2 of the particularly prominent Resistance units. It goes on to character creation. So character creation, we've got the full summary right here. And then here we've got the race choices. Now, in this version of the book, there are quite limited race choices. You can be human. You can be one kind of Eulutian. There are 2 kinds. You can be one kind of Zimian. There are 3 kinds. And you cannot play as a Velithi using the Rulebook Primer for character creation. Now, if you have a campaign book that does feature a Velithi character, that is no longer the case. We do have some. I believe Sirona Specials, the campaign that's being written by Egg Embry and myself, is actually going to have a Velithi character in it. So you'll be able to take that book and use this book, and you would have all of the stats for the character already, so you would not be creating it, and that would mean that you are able to use that character. Next, I have some information on the attributes and skills, and also the derived stats and how you calculate them. Sort of a summary version. The version in the core rulebook is significantly longer than that. I've also got a selection of the specialties. It's fairly limited. There are only 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, lucky for some, specialties in this book. I should say, by the way, if anyone's having trouble with the quality of the video, I'm told that actually the replay has much better quality because my phone is actually uploading it straight onto Kickstarter rather than it being translated through the internet twice rather than once. Anyway, hopefully you can see a rough idea, and hopefully you can see sort of this image here and so on as I flick through them. We've then got a limited selection of implants, just 3 to choose from: the auto injector, the facial morph, and the subdermal armor. Honestly, they're my 3 personal favorites. I usually have at least 2 of these 3 in any character that I build, but there are many other options that you will not get to choose with just character creation in the Rulebook Primer. And then we go into weapons, and again, there's a relatively limited selection. You probably saw some knives and swords on this page. And then over the page, we've got we've got 2 types of ammunition. We've got auto pistol, assault rifle, laser pistol, and sniper rifle. So we don't have the shotgun. We don't have various different kinds of grenades. We've only got the one kind of grenade, rather than smoke grenades, flash grenades, EMP grenades, and so on. We've got 3 types of armor here: light, medium, and heavy. That's all of the types of armor. But there's an additional suit that you can use in the core rulebook, and we've also got the briefing on shields. We've got a few limited pieces of equipment as a selection. We've got hacking equipment, we've got a plasma cutter for engineering, we've got a computational targeting interface for gunnery, and we've got the medical intervention gel and painkillers, which are the 2 main pharmaceuticals that you may use during the game. We then move on to the rules, and there is actually, with the exception of the space combat that I mentioned earlier, there is actually the full set of rules in this book. So you've got all about how you play the Era D10 rule set. You've got the attribute checks, you've got the equipment information, you've got how to work together and in parallel, notoriety, luck points, all of that stuff. Damage and healing on this page, which deals with taking damage and how you heal it, and how you survive when you actually take critical damage. Then we've got statuses. Again, this is exactly as in the core rulebook, including stealth mode and so on. I tell a lie, it's not exactly the same as in the rulebook. You don't have information about survival mode here, which is included in the core rulebook. We've then got combat, entering combat and initiative and sneak attacks and all of that stuff, all the stuff you'd usually expect to see. We've got the full unarmed combat rules here. That's 1 page, 2 pages, and a flow chart that actually explains those 2 pages. So that's our 3 pages of unarmed combat rules. We've then got melee combat, all on 1 page there, ranged combat on the opposite page, and thrown combat, AoE damage, and then we're straight on into the GM section where we talk about gaining experience, and we give you one of the tables. I think there are 3 tables in the main rulebook of character stats to give you an idea of what you might be facing. Again, in the actual campaigns, we'll often give you enemies that you're going to face, and this here is the glossary of terms, so you can understand what we're talking about when we talk about success margin, just quickly and easily inside the back cover. Also inside the back cover, we've got the character sheet. That's true of pretty much every book. Not quite all, but very nearly. So that is the Rulebook Primer. As I say, really the summary of that is it's got everything that you need in order to play the game. There's a lot of history that's not there, but you can pair it up with any of our other expansions and still use it. So you can still use it with the Secret War expansion I'm going to explain in a minute, for example, and you'll be able to play in full, no problems. So I'm just going to put that on one side, if I can find some space. There we go. And I'm going to pull out the core rulebook. So this is the main rulebook for Era of the Consortium. The front cover image here may be very familiar to some of you. From there, I'm just going to open up this book and show you what it's got that the Rulebook Primer does not. So I'm going to skip over the solar system map again. We go into title page, lovely piece of artwork here for the title page. And then we go into actually the how to use this book section, which talks about what each of the parts is for. We've also got a complete table of contents with page numbers if you know that you want part 2, section 3, and you want to know what page to flick to. That's also, of course, in the digital version. So next we've got the part 1, the universe. We start off with the same double page, and then we jump straight into the history of Era of the Consortium. So this is a 500-year history. Now, instantly, that sounds like a lot to consume. So for anyone who's not already familiar with why, there are 500 years of history in this game, because the idea is that instead of just playing, one scenario, one kind of game with this book, you can actually play multiple ones by jumping into the right place in the history. So you can start with this region of the history where they're deconstructing the colony ship that they arrived on, and they are attempting to colonize this very first world. You can skip forward a bit, and you can do some political stuff if you want to, with the Senate and the Big Seven, and the Big Seven becoming powerful. You can skip forward again, and you can actually do some encounters with alien races. This is an image that, again, if you're familiar with us, you may have seen before. It's one of my favorites. This is the first contact with the Ulutians. Again, you can skip forward, and you can sort of go into a more technological age where wonders are actually achievable. They build the jump gates and venture through wormholes and go to other solar systems. And then you can play, if you jump a little further forward than that, you can play in the first contact with the Zimians. And I don't know if you can see this image, but there are some rather nasty, people are being ripped in half and stabbed and things. And unfortunately, first contact with the Zimians went very badly and resulted in this insectoid race attempting to wipe out the Consortium. So you can play against an alien invasion, sort of Starship Troopers style, if that's more the game you want to play. As you go on, there's a number of pieces on the bug war here. Humanity and the Consortium win the bug war, but not without doing something that's perhaps slightly morally questionable, I think is fair to say. We've then got what's called the Time of Enlightenment, where, well, before the Time of Enlightenment, I should say, there's a few more war atrocities, unfortunately, and the Zimian homeworld is actually destroyed by a particular weapon. However, then we move on to the Time of Enlightenment, and again, some of you might be familiar with this image, which I'm also using as the front cover of Predictive Genetic Algorithm. It's one of my favorites. Really shows off the Aleutians very well, I feel. Yeah, so the Time of Enlightenment involved sort of the transhumanism aspect, a little bit of the cyberpunk aspect as people became more integrated with technology. Here is an example of a mechanical arm that was built by an Elliot Dragon, who will become important later in the story. And then as you move on, you have the opportunity to fight as part of the resistance against the Consortium, who are attempting to carry out a plot that will destroy many of the lives in the Ecounus system, the third star system that I introduced to you a minute ago. So all of that is totally accessible thanks to the history, and then we move on to, once again, the summary of the current situation that I mentioned before, and then on through the various factions. So again, we've got Hayden Bank and Smertios Security, but now we've got the rest of the big seven, big eight, I should say: CNC Colonization and Construction, the Mining Conglomerate, Hardcastle Haulage, Moritascus Pharmaceuticals, and Gaia Adaptation and Adjustment, and finally Open Technology in the Senate, who you'll recognize from the Rulebook Primer. We've then got 6 more more minor factions, including Chrome Correction, which runs Sirona and is actually the company in charge in the Sirona Specials campaign. We've got CN, Consortium News, Garhay Industries, who developed the Shield, Raven Optics, who were behind lasers the first time, Lug Chartered Records, who is actually technically the people in charge of the entire consortium, although they have a lot less power than they should have, and Kakalatak, which is a Zimian-founded company. Finally, we've got the resistance pages here, which are the same as in the Rulebook Primer. We then move on to the places, and every single planet in the consortium has a page of its own that explains all of the various things that you would need to know as reference. Now, all of this information is either stated or possible to glean out of the history itself, but I'm a GM. I like to turn to a single page where I can find out what is the background of how Tyrannus became the way it is, what's the landscape, what does it look like on the actual planet, the population, how many human, how many Zimian, Valithi, what are the laws like on Tyrannus? What laws might my players fall foul of? What happens in terms of poverty? How are people dealt with? And finally, what's the tech level of the planet in general? Is everyone walking around with high-tech gadgets, or are they a bit more primitive? Now, for each one of the planets, that is Tyrannus, Nodens, Abnoab. There's Abnoab. Aeron, which is not technically a planet, but space station, but it's extremely large, with a population of 1.6 million. So we decided that probably it deserves its own page. Luxovius, Verbea, the industrial world. Lugus, where the Aleutians made their original home. Clota, the home of open technology. Sirona, which I've mentioned a few times now. Aron, one of the few planets with an atmosphere. Belisama, I want to show you the image for this, actually. I hope this comes through. Belisama is a planet where the Aleutians actually have sort of an underwater city, and the water is breathable for them. Essus, which is the Aleutian asteroid that they actually arrived in this solar system on. Yep, they shoot asteroids around. And finally, Robor and Anku, which have no indigenous population, share a page here. We then move on to various space stations. which have various roles. You've got all of the information you need to explore these space stations and everything that you should need to know about them in order to visit and play on them. The Hardcastle haulage trading post will actually become very important when I start talking about free trader. So that's the end of the places, and I'm now moving on to the races. So the races include humans, which you can see here. You've then got Eulutians, which are squid-like individuals who squeeze themselves into human-shaped suits in order to better, in order to better interact with humanity. I don't know if you can see that image. Hopefully you can. Right here. We've then got the Simians, and these race pages give you all of the information that you need about every species. Finally, we've got the Vilithi. So they talk about the history and how the species joined the Consortium. They talk about what Vilithi society is like, or indeed all of the societies, and what they're like. Excuse me. They talk about each of the societies and what those societies are like. They talk about how these creatures are simple creatures with no self-awareness, whereas the so-called manipulators down here know not because they manipulate individuals, but because they are able to manipulate objects. How they are really the majority of the population of the Vilithi, who are sentient. It talks about their biology. It talks about their age, their maximum age and when they die of old age, when they die of oxygen deprivation, or when they die of food, lack of food. It talks about their language, and it talks about how they are named. And in particular, the Vilithi are interesting in that, if you don't know, they actually use short phrases, such as the breeze on the leaves of a tall tree, or the agility of a bird in the sky. Now, what they do, because humans aren't so good at remembering that entire thing, they have a tendency to reduce that down. So they might call them breeze or bird instead of their entire name. So that brings us to the end of part 1. And I will now continue on to character creation and just explain my way through that. So again, we've got the background. This time we have the entire creation rules. So that includes humans and also Eulutians, but both forms of Eulutians this time. Rather than just having the one suit, this one you might recognize from the Rulebook Primer, we also have the larger and stronger Willa suit. They don't only come in male. Each one has both a male and a female form. That gives the opportunity to choose whether you want to be a dexterous Vilithi or a strong, Eulutian, or a strong Eulutian. Next, we've got the Simians, and again, all 3 casts are ready. Shades of Vengeance Comics. Reduce the width of your screen so that it's more portrait, and you'll get a slightly better view of what you want to see. I'm trying as much as possible to keep the interesting stuff in the middle. So you can play as a Simian politician, or you can play as a Simian worker, as was offered in the Rulebook Primer. But you can also play as a Simian brain. Now, each of these have their own specific extra abilities. The workers are particularly strong, the brains are particularly smart, and the political cast are particularly charismatic. Finally, we've got the Vilithi, which you can play as, which you can create a character for in this book. So the Vilithi, there are actually 4 forms. One which is humanoid, so 2 arms, 2 legs. One which is multi-legged, which moves faster than your average Vilithi. And one which is multi-armed, which can carry extra weapons and is better in combat, but is also easier to damage. And finally, we have the no-limbed form, which we affectionately call the Stump. And it has no limbs, it is unable to move, but it is extremely tough. I don't think any of the Vilithi taste like Snickers, as far as I know. I've never eaten a Vilithi. Oh, I know what you're referring to. Yes, what he's asking about is a slightly anecdotal story that I sometimes tell about the Consortium. This is one of the things that I definitely consider canon. But these little individuals here, they're called collectors. And what they do is they collect sunlight and they store that in sort of sap. And the manipulators, and also various others when there were others in the society, would stick sort of suck the sap out of these small collectors, as they're called, and that was how the society worked. And they mostly wouldn't feed themselves; they'd be fed by the collectors. Now, what happened was when that society was overthrown, the collectors were actually set loose to walk around on the streets. And right here on its back, you can actually see a device which will freeze dry the sap and actually eject it in return for sort of a credit donation to the collector. So they run around and they sort of bump into your knees, asking you to give them money for the sap. It's somewhat, I've described it before as somewhat like a Snickers bar, so I imagine that's where that came from. So the backstory, there are numerous backstories for both Consortium and Resistance in this book. You can see here that's 3 pages of Consortium, and then 2 pages of Resistance backstories, which you can use as a guideline in order to develop your character. From the Consortium, you know, you might be a Moritascus Pharmaceuticals medic, like this individual here. Or alternatively, from the Resistance, perhaps you're an assassin, or maybe you're one of their surveillance experts who taps into the surveillance cameras and sort of monitors Consortium activity. We go through morals, we go through quirks, neither of which are actually in the Rulebook Primer in detail. And then we have an appearance section. Again, this is one of my favorite images right here. Of sort of a subway car, in inverted commas, a high-tech subway car, and the story being told by this image is phenomenal. I love it. So we then move on to, again, a description of the statistics, and you can see here that I've taken a lot more space because all of them were in 1 page on the previous in the Rulebook Primer, and here I've got an entire page for the attributes, an entire page for the derived stats, and then 2 entire pages for the skills to go through them all in detail and explain when you might use them, why why esteem is better than persuasion or intimidation or seduction on the occasions you can use it, and so on. Next, I've got the specialties. So we've got a huge selection of specialties here, at least 1 for every single skill. Plus some miscellaneous ones. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of specialties for skills, and then miscellaneous specialties and racial specialties. So you can actually get a bonus for being a Zimian or a Lutian or a Valithi. You can actually have an extra thing, which the others won't get. So all of the specialties are listed here. That's 6 pages of specialties, and then we go on to leveling up, which is covered in the same way that it is in the Rulebook Primer. But we've also got this helpful diagram here, which just reminds you at a glance 1 attribute per level, 2 skills per level, 1 implant per level up to your maximum stamina, and 1 specialty for most levels. I'd say about half the levels you get a specialty. So that's the end of the character creation section. We then move on to implants, equipment, and vehicles. And moving straight on to implants, you can see already there's a large range of implants. They're actually 6.5, 7.5 pages. No, 5.5 pages. I just can't count. I'm sorry. 5.5 pages of implants, which allow you to have various things, including the ones which were in the Rulebook Primer, such as the subdermal armor, but also including one of my favorites, which is the Schrodinger's implant, which can turn into any other implant because it's not been observed. Then when you decide what it is, it changes and it can never change back. We then go on to the weapons. So again, we've got the combat knives and the swords, which you can see. We've also got cudgels. We've got the monomolecular whip. And that's a fun one. For a long time, we talked about whether using the whip should actually have a serious impact by fumbling and actually damage yourself if you fumble with it, because you whip yourself in the face with a monomolecular whip, which would hurt. For the ranged weapons, we actually have 6 sets of ammunition, from armor-piercing rounds to kinetic breaches, which ignore shields, slicer rounds, which cause bleeding, tangle rounds, which are non-lethal. So we've got a bow and arrow. We've also got the auto pistol and the assault rifle that you'll recognize from the primer. But in addition to that, we've got a few extras. We've got the submachine gun, which actually has the fastest. Indeed, Indiana Jones did cut his chin with a whip in the 3rd movie, and actually I think that was what inspired us to talk about it in the first place. We've got the needler, which is used as a sort of stealth weapon, totally silent. We've got the tangle tape sprayer, which is designed to only immobilize your opponent rather than kill them. We've also got the combat shotgun, which I mentioned before was missing, and the flamethrower, one of my favorites. I have a lot of favorites in this game, I'll be honest. Yes, the whip is somewhat deadly. The flamethrower is not included in the Rulebook Primer. We also have the experimental and secret weapons, which are actually designed to kill aliens while leaving humans relatively unharmed, which is somewhat distasteful to most people. In fact, anyone who watches, either played or watches our upcoming video of the True Play session that we did at EtherCon, they actually ran into this, and I was very happy to be able to sort of have them role play in a way that I felt was realistic. So yes, we've got anti-Eulutian, anti-Zimian, and anti-Velithi weapons, but no anti-human weapons. We've then got grenades, flashbangs, gas grenades, smoke grenades, explosive charges, and EMP grenades. So we have loads of grenades here. You're right, actually. Bullets are particularly effective against humans, and that's actually the reason that we originally chose that. But as I started making the story, I realized that actually I wanted this to be a specific thing, that they're developing anti-alien weapons. But in the very original version that some of you may have heard me talk about, which was the 24-hour game at Durham University, where this whole thing began. Actually, that was the reason that we made the anti-Eulutian and anti-Zimian weapons. I've been asked by Alex Carpenter, is there or will there be an anti-fifth race weapon? Well, that's a very interesting question. I guess you'll have to wait and see. Do you think that the Consortium is still going to try to eliminate all aliens? If you think yes, then I suspect the answer will be yes. However, it's not yet been revealed what happened. We've then got some heavier weapons. We've got anti-tank mines, anti-personnel mines, a disposable rocket launcher, which is one of my favorites. I just love the concept of a rocket launcher that you fire and then throw away. And then heavy weapons such as a normal rocket launcher, able to be used constantly. We've got a minigun and an automatically loaded rocket launcher, which is available only on a certain kind of vehicle. We then move on to armor, and as with the Rulebook Primer, we have light, medium, and heavy armor. We also have the stealth suit, which I mentioned earlier while I was going through the primer. This is not available in the Rulebook Primer. It does not offer you any armor at all, but it allows you to turn invisible. Think Predator. You're not totally undetectable, but you are very hard to see. We've then got several pages of skill-enhancing equipment. And then some pages of medicines and drugs, which includes the skill pill, which actually trebles your skill of a nominated skill for 5 minutes, and then it reduces to 0 for 2 hours. So it's brilliant for a last minute, oh no, we need the crunch, but make sure that you don't use it too early or you might regret it. We've got some various bits and pieces such as gas mask and oxygen tank, spacesuit, and vision enhancing devices that finish off the sort of personal equipment here. And then we move on to mounted weapons in planetary and space combat, from 30mm tank cannons and long-range missiles to explosive mines and electromagnetic mines, which are designed to be launched into space. Next, we've got the strike weapons, the substance transportation by rapid induction of kinetic energy. And you will find very quickly, as I go through the next few pages, I really like acronyms. These were actually developed in transit during the journey from Earth to Consortium space, and were developed into weapons en route, much to the disappointment of the creator. We've also got laser cannon weapon systems. And we've got the weapons that the Zimians use in space combat, specifically the acid sprayer and the acid projectile launching system, which was developed during the Bug War. Next, we move on to vehicles. So here we have the disarm mech, which is capable of carrying either 2 rocket launchers, or 2 miniguns, or 2 flamethrowers, or any combination of single weapons, 1 on each arm. That gives it quite a significant advantage, not to mention the fact that it actually has vehicle-level armor, which makes it very difficult to destroy using conventional weapons. Again, in the True Play session, and also in the very first episode of Claymore Unit by Dice and Stuff, they face down a disarm. And I'm pretty sure they steal a disarm at some point as well, unless I'm getting confused. But anyway, then we have the MUT, armored terrain, multi-gun armed universal terrain transport. We have tanks, we have aircraft, we have shuttles which are unarmed and cargo shuttles, drop pods, mining scouts. We have pages and pages of combat and non-combat vehicles. Here are the fighters that you're likely to encounter. And we have light cruisers, medium cruisers. We even have pirate ships, illegally armed freighters, heavy cruisers, carriers, and the Orion. The Orion is the largest ship in Consortium space so far that is actually still flying. It is 5 kilometers long and 3 in diameter, and it is the ship on which the last stand of Stiletto unit session takes place. We then have the Zimian craft. So during the Bug War, the Zimians had their own fighters and fighters and cruisers and carriers, I should say. And they use these to devastating effects against the Consortium, and the stats for all of them are right here. We've got a few of the space station stats, and then we've got an entire double page devoted to security measures which you may run into, from biometric scans and cargo inspection to spot searches and ship ID checks. Anything that you might run into while you're passing through a checkpoint. And that brings us to the end of the equipment and weapons. We're then on to the rules, which again are very, very similar to the Rulebook Primer rules. They've got the survival mode, which I mentioned was not in the Rulebook Primer, right here. That lets you choose to go into survival mode, and actually you are then much harder to kill. You're able to tank a lot more stuff, as long as you can stay in survival mode, which requires rolls. We've then got the unarmed combat, the ranged combat, melee, ranged. And as you can see, we've got a bit more space in this section. We've got a page to describe it, and then an entire page for the flowchart here. AoE, we've got vehicle combat, and we've got the space combat as well. So you can follow through space combat, and that's what I was mentioning about the free trader expansion. I recommend that you have the space combat. Then we've got a few pages about attribute and skill use, about where you might use any given attribute, and how they are useful and how they're combined. Just a bit more detail for anyone who is unsure about what they're doing. We've also got some information about how you use. Excuse me. We've also got some information about how you use interpersonal skills, and some indicative numbers for bribes, because you never know. We've then got the GM section here. So we start with a page and a half about some various thoughts that we came up with while we were playing and playtesting this game, which cover all kinds of things from unlimited ammunition, that is unlimited, not infinite. Please don't be like that, player. And reducing skills. For example, if you decide that your character only knows psychology, not medicine, then you can actually reduce that, and you get a +2 benefit for doing so. So you can actually be better than anyone else at that if you sort of subdivide. That is at the GM's discretion. We then go on to the suggested campaigns, which run through the entire history of the Consortium, giving information about the kinds of sessions that you might play during those periods. We've got hardcore rules that go into how you might make the rules a bit harder, make it a little more challenging for your players if they're having too much immediate time of it. These are quite nasty, including instant kills actually killing you, gaining penalties for having less than 2 in any attribute, less than or equal to 2 in any attribute. So if you're below average, then you actually have negatives. Electromagnetic pulse permanently disables everything, and you have to actually replace the equipment and the implants if they're hit by them. We then move on to worked examples. We've got a worked example of combat, and we've got a worked example of space combat, just to make sure that everyone is 100% clear on how those run. We've got an appendix here with example fumble outcomes. For example, if you fumble with commercial, maybe you get suckered by a micro bubble in the local stock market, invest, and lose all of your money. Just in case people are having trouble thinking of some interesting options that may happen. Pilot here, I've got you jab the buttons so hard that they cease to function, which I'm sure you can imagine is pretty unpleasant for a pilot. Next, we've got a double page of characters that you might come across in the world, with complete stats and even armor, weapons, and equipment they will be in possession of. We've then got several pages of example playable characters. If you don't want to roll your own, or it's your first time, you want to try something quickly, we've got some example playable characters right here on this double page for exactly that purpose, and that double page. We've then got a full index. So what I've done is I've separated the index into a story index and a gameplay index, which means that the story terms that you want to seek out, you're not going to start getting confused with, for example, riposte the medium cruiser and riposte the move in combat. We've then got the gameplay index right there, and then I'd like to just call attention to this. These individuals are actually the backers who backed the original Era of the Consortium Kickstarter. At least one of them is on this live cast right now, Alex Carpenter, whose name is right there. Thank you very much for coming back, Alex. It's great to have you back with us. I'm sure there are many others as well, but I've not seen any other names pop up that I could easily identify, so I'm picking on Alex. Everyone who backed the original Kickstarter is on this page, and rightly so, in my opinion. Thank you very much to anyone who is watching who is on this page. You helped make this book possible originally. It's really something. Finally, we've got the glossary and character sheet, exactly the same as the Rulebook Primer. So this is the core rulebook. On the Kickstarter, you can get this along with all of the new expansions for £40 in paperback. Yeah, that. You can get it on that tier. Now, most of the other tiers offer the Era of the Consortium Definitive Edition Rulebook that I'm going to go on to in a moment and explain why that is different from the core rulebook. But while I'm here, if there are any questions while I switch over books, please drop them in the chat. I am watching and I will notice. So this is the core rulebook. It's 300 pages long. And it actually, I don't know how well you can see this, but this is a 4-year-old copy of the Era of the Consortium rulebook that I have used a minimum of monthly, mostly more often than that. And I think you'll be able to see it's really held up quite well. There's a little bit of wear on the corner there and a little bit on the spine, but really in general, for something that's used pretty much constantly, this is really held up really well. And I'm continuing with the same printer for exactly that reason. I'm very happy with the binding and the work that they're doing on printing the book. So I haven't seen any questions, so I'm going to assume there are none, and I'm going to move on to the Definitive Edition Rulebook, which you'll instantly notice is a plain white cover with just the logo down the bottom and the title of the book up at the top. Now, this is a deliberate decision. On the shelf, all of the hardback all of the hardback expansions and also the Definitive Edition Rulebook. They make a set. It's very smart. I'm very happy to have it on my shelf. And I may show it to you at the end if I can sort of stand them up in front of the camera and make it work. It didn't work super well last time, but I'll see what happens this time. So this contains all of the content of the core rulebook, plus an extra 120 pages. So there are a few bits and pieces at the front. There's a new introduction, which I didn't use, which didn't exist before. There's a few paragraphs about the game itself and what you can expect from it, which was added at the suggestion of one of our writers. One of our writers, Darren Watts, who actually worked with me on New Worlds. When he read the book, he said that he would recommend adding this in, and I thought, well, why not? We've then got sort of the part one, the universe, and you may notice that actually the title page is the front cover of the core rulebook. I've used the stiletto unit image here. Now, unlike in the core rulebook, we've actually included the time travel campaign introduction in this book, which we didn't use in the core rulebook. Now, again, we go through a very similar set of history. However, this has actually been expanded and improved. There are new stories in here. I want to say offhand, it's about 70 new stories that we've added to this section. I've actually opened it on the page of one of them here, which is adding people to the Senate and how that worked in the early years of the Consortium. It's got loads more history for you to enjoy. It's got the Exodus to Nodens, which is actually a story I wrote during the original Era of the Consortium Kickstarter, and I loved so much that I decided to put into this actual book. Next, I've got a few more stories to show you. This is the, here we go. This is the golden anniversary of the Consortium, 50 CE, which has a rather interesting story, which demonstrates just how far Hayden Bank have managed to penetrate into society. I won't spoil it for you. It's a very interesting story. I recommend you have a look at that. If you're getting the Definitive Edition Rulebook, of course. So as I go through the story, there are various sections that have been added to. There are various which haven't. We didn't feel any necessity to add to the bug war, for example. It's very detailed and covered those 18 years in a lot of detail with a lot of things that happened. But we did add to many of the areas where there was actually a longer gap than we liked. This here, for example, is part of the time of sorrow, when the Zimians were actually herded into ghettos, for lack of a better word, and were not allowed to leave in almost every case. In fact, those areas are then attacked, and many Zimians die as a result. It's a genuine tragedy. And as we go through the story, there's more of this. I don't really have a lot more to say, except there are loads more stories in here. There's new artwork, as I've shown you. There are many more new artwork images than I've actually shown you while I've been flicking through. So yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of the addition we've been able to make to this book. I feel that it's very worthwhile, and I'm particularly happy with the fact that we were able to add a lot more of the Elliot Dragon story into this book. How did Elliot Dragon become the villain that we know? What things happened to him that made him who he is? And that's a very interesting sort of discussion. For anyone who doesn't know, I pointed out Elliot Dragon last time as we moved through. This is the guy with the mechanical arm. Now, as before, you can play any of the subgenres of sci-fi that I mentioned. And we were talking about dice and stuff a minute ago. This is something that they didn't even realize was in the Definitive Edition Rulebook until a couple of weeks ago when I reminded them. This is actually the Claymore unit here, and right before the destruction of Gateway, which is featured in the Dice and Stuff podcast. Now, anyone who doesn't know, Dice and Stuff have been running a play podcast for about 4 years now, off and on. They have reached roughly 100 episodes, and it's a really good podcast. If you want to know how Era the Consortium works in terms of gameplay, I strongly recommend it. www.diceandstuff.com. So I'm continuing on to the end of the history, and again, we've got all of the same factions that we had last time. A little bit more about the Big Eight on this page, which is not included in the Big Seven and Big Eight, which is not included in the main rulebook. All of those factions still. We then go on to the places, which is the same for most of the planets, but then we actually have an extra few pages about the gas giants and the moons in their region. Now, anyone who's a fan and already owns Revival may know of Borvo, which is known as Screaming Borvo to some, thanks to the radio emissions that emerged from it. The various gas giants all have, well, mostly have moons in their vicinity, and it's what you will find there, which pirate groups are in charge, and so on and so forth. We then go on to the ships and space stations that we had before, but I've actually included Gateway here as well. This is Gateway 1, which is mentioned in the podcast, and this is Gateway 2, which was captured by a Katana unit and donated to the Resistance. We've also got a little more information about the Outsystem Combine bases and how they do what they do, which is to hollow out asteroids using using technology similar to the Zimians in modern times in the Consortium. Jump gates and AOIB and so on. We then go on to the races. Now, this is exactly the same as in the core rulebook. As indeed is character creation, there's no change in character creation. You will receive all of the same stuff. Indeed, Alex, open all of the airlocks is a great way to clear out a ship. Certainly what I would come up with if pushed. Now, equipment and vehicles. Now, I've got some extra images. Now, this image has a really interesting story, actually, this image here. This was actually done for the original core rulebook, but I couldn't find a page for it. So I reluctantly had to leave it. It's one of my, I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite images because I've said that too many times, but it's a brilliant image that shows many of the implants that you can have in the entire game, from the displacement device, the subdermal armor, the bionic eye, the remote viewer, the cranial implant up here, the shocker, the bionic arm, the medical purification device, the bionic leg. Many of the options are, excuse me, many of the options are visible and able to be shown in this wonderful image. And opposite this image is actually a more detailed history of the implants and their progression from the first generation all the way up until the 10th generation, which actually includes an in for one of the implants, or one of the expansions that we've not managed to unlock and is some way down the list, which we're calling Ulio 2. And that actually grows off the 8th generation implants in roughly 350 CE. Now, again, all of the play implants, there aren't actually any new ones. I've just added the history in there so that you understand more. Again, the weapons are also identical to that found in the core rulebook, as are the piece of armor, the equipment, the vehicles, and the spaceships. With a couple of exceptions, I have actually included Gateway and Gateway 2 in this book as well, so you have stats for them if you ever want to fight. Zimian ships there and the security measures. We've then got the rules, which are, again, exactly the same as in the core rulebook. I won't bore you by going through them again in detail unless someone has some questions. And if you do, again, please let us know in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer. Now, the GM section begins slightly differently. It still has that 1.5 pages that I mentioned, but then it immediately moves on to a double page, which covers every subgenre of sci-fi that I could think of: alien invasion, alien technology discovery, colonization, cyberpunk, espionage, exploration and space opera, first contact, mad science, pirates, political, resistance, as in the resistance, survival horror, time travel, transhumanism, and utopian. And it gives indications of all of the places in the timeline where these things could be particularly interesting if you want to run a session of that sort. So that's a brand new double page for this book. I then go on to actually give detailed examples for every single skill attribute combination about why you might use it. So, for example, the reason you might use charisma is to blend into a crowd of people in order to hide. Well, that one's fairly obvious. I'm sure that people can come up with something a little more obscure. For example, why would you use, I'm trying to think of one that isn't super obvious. Can anyone think of a skill attribute combination that isn't super obvious? One of mine is one I've got here is strength and seduction. Why would you use strength and seduction? To flex in front of the barmaid. So that would be a good example of one that's quite unlikely. See, to me, they're all obvious because I've gone through and I've figured out why would you use every single case. But this is a very valuable piece of a set of pages, I should say, for the GM. It's a very valuable tool for them if they're worrying about people min-maxing a bit. So you can actually figure out why you might use various other things and put your players into that situation. It then goes on to the campaigns, much as the core rulebook, although we do actually have one extra image, which is the stiletto unit at the core image. I've never been able to fit this on the size it deserves. On the size that it deserves. Anyone who's ever visited our Cerner convention may well have seen this actually as a full-size poster on the wall, because it's a really good image and it's very relevant to the session that we run at conventions. I've then got the hardcore rules, the worked examples in the same way. The appendix with the fumbles and the character stats, the example characters, the story index, which obviously is a bit longer as a result of the story being quite a bit longer, and the gameplay index. And then finally, we've got the not only the original Era of the Consortium rulebook backers, who are once again credited here, we've also got everyone who joined in the last Era of the Consortium Kickstarter, including in particular the big 8 here, who all pledged for the top tiers of that Kickstarter. And yeah, well, the big 8. There were 8 of them I couldn't resist. Whether, you know, which companies they identify with is something you should perhaps ask them. We then got the glossary and the character sheet. So this is the definitive edition rulebook. It's 420 pages long. It only comes in hardback or digital, rather than the core rulebook, which I showed you, which did come in paperback or hardback or digital. And you can get this book along with every single expansion, if you don't already have them, for £25 in digital format. And I believe that the first time that you can get the definitive edition rulebook in hardback is the £98 tier. You also get a bunch of other stuff on that tier, I should say. You don't just get the hardback for £98. This is worth about £60 retail, and you get it slightly better value than that in this Kickstarter. So that's the definitive edition rulebook, and that's all 3 of the actual sort of rulebooks which we have. So unless there are any questions, I'm now going to move on to the expansions, starting with the Secret War, which was the first one that we brought out some time ago, before we actually did the previous expansions Kickstarter, although we actually funded a second print run for this because we'd already sold out. So the Secret War is a 26-page expansion, and one of the criteria for expansions for me, well, there are several criteria for expansions that I should probably explain. First of all, an expansion has to offer you something that you don't already have in the game. Secondly, it also has to offer story, which expands the universe and explains things that you didn't already know. So the Secret War is an interesting one because it actually goes back right to the start of the Consortium. The first story here, I don't know if you can read that, but it's actually in 5 CE. So in 5 CE, Hayden Bank founds what they call the Shades. And the Shades are an elite cadre. The Shades are an elite cadre of operatives who are able to get extra equipment and are pretty much given free reign to use all of the information that Hayden Bank gathers about everybody in order to keep Hayden Bank on top. So we've got a few stories in here, and then when the we've got one story about Scimitar Unit who find out about the Shades, and then a new unit called the Phantoms is born, and for the first time we actually picture Samson, the leader of the resistance, in this book. Artwork by Keith Draws, who also did the layout for this particular book. He did the layout for all the books, artwork for this particular book by Keith Draws. So we've got several more stories about Phantoms and how they operate. So the Phantoms are tasked with destroying the Shades, and they often claim the equipment off Shades that they do manage to defeat. And I'm sorry, there is light reflecting off that onto the camera. So this is now the character creation section for Shades and Phantoms. Anyone with a notoriety of 3 or less, oh no, less than 3, I'm sorry, 2 or less, may become a Shade or Phantom, as long as they are also level 3. Otherwise, they will not be allowed to. You also have a few new backgrounds and some notes on the race. Now, unfortunately, Hayden Bank are a little bit racist, and you can only be human in order to become I should say xenophobic rather than racist, I suppose. You can only be human in order to join the Shades. However, Phantoms can be any race, but must be part of the Resistance. So, new implants that are available to only the Phantoms, new weapons that are available, new armor that is like the stealth suit, but also gives you armor bonus. So you also have resistance to weapons as well as being invisible. You also get security drones, which will cover your back, as well as implant masking technology to hide that you have special implants, and various other bits and pieces, including but not limited to a ship of your very own, which is stealthed. So, a GM section about what are shades, what are phantoms, and when to use them. 2 campaigns, one as a phantom and one as a shade, which is actually a PvP campaign, although you can't be too obvious about it. Each of those are 3 sessions long, and you are able to play those through with any group. There are 2 example shades, 2 example phantoms, and then at the back again, I do want to draw attention to the fact that all of these individuals were the people who really made this happen. Without them, we could not have made this book. So, and sorry, inside back cover, character sheet as always. So, what is the Secret War good for? It's good if you want to do a sort of James Bond in space. It offers new equipment, special gadgets, and all kinds of things that are great fun to play with. Next, I'm going to talk you through the 5th race. Now, the 5th race was mentioned a little earlier in the chat. They are called the Pliangrathlon, but the 5th race expansion features more than just a new species. It fast forwards the history to 450 CE instead of 447, where the previous history ended. And it covers that 3 years, which includes first contact with the 5th race. But it also includes a rather unexpected find under the ice of Sirona, which actually results in plasma weaponry becoming available. So there's quite a bit of story. There's a little bit more of the fallout of the Resistance and the Consortium. There's a little bit more about how the Consortium adapts to having the big 8 instead of the big 7. And there's a rewrite, there's a new summary of the current situation for 450 CE, which includes all of the new information that you need to know. And that can replace the 447 if you're playing in 450. You only need to read this. And the Lugus planet has actually had some minor changes to it because the Pliangrathlon ship actually crash landed not too far from the Ulutian planet. The Ulutian colony ship. There is a reason behind that. The Pliangrathlon crashed there deliberately. Well, not crashed deliberately, but when they had to crash, they deliberately crashed close to the Ulutians. The Pliangrathlon themselves have a 2-page race entry, as with all of the other races. And then we go straight on to the character creation, which also has a 2-page race entry, as with the other races. We then move on to several unique backgrounds for the Pliangrathlon, as well as 2 new quirks and 1 new racial specialty, which only the Pliangrathlon may have. Now we move on to technology, and the Pliangrathlon caused a boom in technology. At least that's what the Consortium claim. In reality, the Resistance have also been developing a lot of things which will help in their fight. So we have several new implants, 6 in total. We've got 6 new kinds of rounds that you can use in ranged weapons. We've got a new resistance-only weapon, the heavy pistol. And we've got the ability to craft enhancements into your weapons, such as an ammo switcher, which can switch between ammunition mid-shot. We've got extra attachments that you can add onto them, such as a sort of improved stock, which was actually inspired by something that they mentioned in Dice and stuff, because they had improved stocks on some of the weapons. So, all of that's available for the first time in the 5th race. along with laser weapons, more than just the laser pistol. There are now laser rifles and laser sniper rifles, developed by various scientists of interesting name. I don't know whether you can actually see that, but perhaps if you are able to zoom in on that, you'll find it quite amusing. We then move on to plasma weaponry, including the plasma cannon man portable and the plasma rifle. So the plasma cannon man portable is actually of alien origin, although they aren't revealing that. And the plasma rifle is actually of Consortium construction. Using the Pliangrathlon gravity technology, they've developed an implode grenade, which actually has a story devoted to it. It's very cool. And we've got the Tangle mine added for the first time, along with armor for the Pliangrathlon, just the images that you would have had if they'd be in the core rulebook. And then we have an alternative to the shield, which is called the energy absorber unit, which replaces a shield and offers some different alternatives. Finally, we actually have anti-alien countermeasures developed by the Resistance, which were developed by a Zimian scientist named Crixalatrix, a member of Katana unit, which includes the shield Faraday cage to defend against the arc gun, the adapted breather bubble, which defends against the pheromone spray against the Zimians, and the anti-grub surface gel, which is sprayed on the Valithi to save them from the death beetle grubs. We've then got the same opportunities as you have with weapons for armor. So you have the opportunity to add certain things into your armor, such as an oxygen supply or an onboard auto injector, or you know, steadied hands that are actually holding you steady, which gives you a bonus for hit for ranged combat. There are a few more pieces of equipment, such as the silk alloy climbing rope and the noise cancellation belt, and as well as the communications jammer and the hollow shroud. And then finally, we talk about some of the larger impacts of Pliangrathlon weapons, Pliangrathlon technology, sorry, gravity control technology, which allowed both the creation of planetary core mines by controlling gravity fields a bit more cleverly than the Consortium were able to prior to that, and also the area of effect gravity imposer station, the Aegis. There are campaigns in this book as well, for the First Contact, and also for the various stories that you experience as you read through this book. There are 4 Pliangrathlon characters which can be used as examples. 6, I'm sorry, Pliangrathlon characters which can be used as examples. Some are resistant, some are non-aligned, and some are Consortium. And then finally, the character sheet at the back of the book. So this is 50 pages, actually. This is 50 pages long. It offers the new alien race. It offers the extra technology, the ability to craft your weapons and armor to improve them and suit them more to your needs. And it offers plasma weaponry, laser weaponry, and various new pieces of equipment and no vehicles, implants though, but various new pieces of equipment and implants. So this is the 5th race. Any questions about the 5th race while I move on to the next one, which is called Rapier? Now Rapier, and you might be able to see from the thing here, my copy was actually folded when it was put in my letterbox, which is very sad. And I'll have to do something about that at some point. But this is Rapier. Now Rapier is another 26 pager. It gives you the opportunity to load your character into the virtual environment of a computer in order to hack. which means that what you can do is actually align combat turns with hacking, and let people have the narrative opportunities that they usually have in normal combat. So these environments are highly varied and give you loads of opportunities as the GM to be creative. And the individuals have to run a gauntlet within these places in order to hack the computer and do whatever they wish to do. So this features some stories about Rapier Unit, which is where the expansion gets its name. There are 3 new backgrounds. There's a section about appearance inside the system. I don't know how well you can see this, but this is actually a flower in a flower pot, which is my favorite actual avatar to be, and it fires out of the flower there. There are also 3 new specialties relating specifically to hacking in this way. And obviously there's some new equipment section stuff to add. There is the weapon that you can use inside, which can take many forms. This is one example. You get a rig, which goes as part of your implant. And you can add to that black programs, which give you an advantage inside, and grey programs, which allow you to actually do an action. For example, you may have a nuke which blows up everything in the system and destroys it. As long as you can get to the sort of run past the gauntlet and get to it in order to insert that grey program. Equally, you could plant a Trojan, or an actual bot which creates a back door for you, and many other bits and pieces can actually be done. There are 7 options here. There are then white programs which roam through the system, attempting to defend it against people exactly like you. Now they can take many forms, and I've got a few examples here, but really it'll take a form that is appropriate to the actual system that you are inside. Now, what we had recently in one of our sessions is we actually had a system that was kind of like a mini solar system with the planets that you could walk around in a matter of seconds. And the sun at the center of the solar system was actually a firewall, which was a very appropriate way of expressing the firewall in that particular situation. You had to destroy and penetrate it in order to reach the source of the code and be able to drop a grey program. Finally, there are white hat users who may well enter and attempt to stop you as well. That is, individuals who are working to defend the system. As you enter the system, it's sort of very nice, and it will try to treat you as if you're an authorized user. But as soon as you're proving to be unauthorized, it will transform into something much more nightmarish and terrifying. These are the rules for actually loading in and running a gauntlet. This is the rules about the rig and what you can do, how you can use multiple users and how they can work together, as well as enemy stats. And what happens to you if you are either booted by the system or pulled out early, neither of which are good, as I'm sure you can imagine. I've got some general advice for constructing gauntlets and putting in white hat users, as well as a few other bits and pieces that came up in the playtesting and the actual gameplay that we felt was good to advise people of if they're GMing this. We've also got a campaign. This particular book is set more during the sort of climax of the core rulebook, and this campaign is called Kalad Bolg, where Rapier Unit discover about Kalad Bolg and what that means. We also have one more campaign, Final Mission, which is the end of the amazing hacker Axine Iraxian Axaltic. Don't spell or misspeak his name, otherwise he might rip you in half. He is the most experienced hacker in the Resistance, and unfortunately he's at the end of his life. He's had his 9th life cycle as a Zimian, and this is really about his final mission. I've also put in a worked example to give an example of how it works inside the system. So this is a 26-page expansion that offers you the ability to load in, and if you're a hacker who always seems to do nothing in combat, this is the perfect opportunity to have something more to do while everyone else outside is defending you. In this, your intelligence and your computer become your weapon skills, so you don't have to be good with weapons to go into the computer and be extremely powerful. That's deliberate, of course. So that's Rapier. Next, I've got a New Dawn. And a New Dawn is another 26-page expansion, which offers psionics. And the psionics that are here are sort of the birth of psionics, which is why it's called a New Dawn. And there are two kinds of characters. Some are experimented on and some are volunteers. There's plenty of story in here about how psionics may be treated on both sides of that spectrum. There's an epic story about them escaping and being rescued by the Resistance. It opens the question about resistance psionics and what are the Resistance doing about the psionics themselves. It offers two new backgrounds, test subject and volunteer, as well as a warning that as your psionic power grows and you use it more, you will actually become more insane. You will gain what's called psionic madness. And you're going to have to be careful about how often you use your psionic abilities, because otherwise you're going to end up totally insane. And that's covered in a minute in the rules. We've got and that are available to only psionics, as well as numerous psionic abilities. You get a certain number of points, 8 psionic ability points to start with, and you can use those in order to get various abilities. Now, all of these psionic abilities are purely mental. They cannot affect the physical world. However, that doesn't stop you making someone believe that they are on fire. So they can act as if they are on fire and roll on the floor, but they are totally unable to put it out. There is mind control, there is muscle control, there is remote viewing, there is the ability to induce horror. There is even the ability to actually make someone repeat their previous action instead of doing something else that they want to do. So you can actually make someone repeat what they just did. There are also defensive abilities such as Clamp Down, which removes any ability of other psionics to detect you. Psionic Vision, which is pictured here, it allows you to see psionics in one form or another. And Telepathy, which allows you to link everyone telepathically so that they can communicate without needing to speak. So the rules cover obviously using psionic abilities and how to use offensive psionic abilities as well. We talk about the descent into madness and also what the effect of having various levels of psionic madness are, which begin with minor visual and auditory hallucinations. You know, maybe an enemy turns into a giant monster, and goes through blackouts where you can't control your actions. So the GM will tell you, please roll this, and the GM will be operating the character for a brief period of time as an emergent personality takes control. Paranoia, so, you know, the character might begin to suspect at the highest levels, you know, paranoia, you know, the character begins to suspect that even its allies are against it. And finally, total instability, no longer coordinate thought and actions. You are therefore no longer playable. And your character is removed from play, and you'll probably need to roll a new character, I'm afraid, if you reach that point. And once the psionic madness point is added, there is no way to remove it. There is no way to cure this. I also go into psionics and combat and what happens when you fumble, which is pretty severe, actually, from the fumbles. And about removing exhaustion, which happens kind of you build up exhaustion, and then you build up madness when you max out your exhaustion. Finally, there's a GM section, which talks about technology. So psionics instantly reject all implants. You're no longer able to use implants. And that means that you are not instantly recognizable, but it's suspicious. I've also then got a few other notes on that about madness, about what being experimented on is like, and also about psionic combat. So I've got a worked example here of what it looks like for a psionic in combat. I finish up with a character sheet, which has a special psionic section, which allows you to add the psionics instead of the implants. And that's A New Dawn, the 4th expansion. I'm next going to talk about this book here, which is the Expansions Volume 1. It contains The Secret War, The Fifth Race, Rapier, and A New Dawn. But it also contains some extra material that is not found in any of those books. Specifically, there is an enhanced version of The Secret War, which is actually 50 pages instead of 26, which was added into this book. So this book is 152 pages long. That's two 26-page books, Rapier and A New Dawn, and two 50-page books, which are Fifth Race and the expanded Secret War. So the expanded Secret War has a lot more stories in it, and that's actually the difference. There's a lot more history about the and also extra artwork, I should say. There's a lot more history and more artwork about the origins of the Shades, how they acted the way they did. I believe offhand there is another Phantom story as well that we add into this. So as you can see here, I'm flicking through, and they're all of the same images that you will have noticed from the Secret War and the Fifth Race. This is designed to be used alongside the Definitive Edition Rulebook, but equally you could buy this and have it with just Rulebook Primer and play just as well as if you had all of the other expansion books. It's got all of the same content, so I'm not going to bother going into too much detail about that, because I've just gone into it in a large amount of detail. And you'll see here that the Secret War stuff is slightly separated, and then I go onto the credits for each book and the list of backers and the big 8. So the original Consortium Rulebook backers are not listed in this book. It is only the backers of the A Universe of Expansions Kickstarter, because obviously the backers who contributed to the original Consortium Rulebook did not directly contribute to this book. I'm going to talk about the other expansions shortly, the upcoming expansion shortly, but this book, I expect to make another one quite similar to it for this Kickstarter, which will be the Expansions Volume 2. And it will contain, I imagine, Free Trader, New Worlds, Predictive Genetic Algorithm, and I'm hoping Home Base. So this is the Expansions Volume 1. As I said, the difference between it and the 4 expansions I just went through is that it has an expanded version of the Secret War with 25 extra pages of story that really go into a lot more detail rather than just skipping through, giving you one story every 100 years. As well as an interesting story about Hayden Bank and how the succession perhaps happened in a way that was slightly unexpected at one point in the history. The next expansion I'm moving on to is called Revival. Now, Revival is an expansion that was written by myself and Jonathan Lewis, who was in the chat room of the previous live stream. I'm not sure if he made it over or if he had to go do something. But this was originally supposed to be a 60-page book. And because he and I loved it so much, it actually became 150 pages. It features a full story of a campaign, a complete story which features a really awesome story about boarding a derelict alien ship, sorry, a derelict consortium ship, I should say, which is swarming with all kinds of creatures, as you might expect from Aliens or Dead Space. And then the group are having to work their way through the ship and survive. So the story offers sort of one possible way through the campaign, and then we move on to how you actually play the campaign for yourself. So there are 5 playable characters in this, and 1 NPC that starts off with them. And then there are numerous replacement characters for the times when you die. Because this is a survival horror campaign, it features many of the rules that some of you might be familiar with from Era Survival, such as limited ammunition, durability of weapons that they will break, limited uses on medicines and so on, salvaging, resting, and receiving a negative stat penalty for resting. However, it also includes several unique specialties which are not found in the core rulebook. They are unique to this, and some of them are quite powerful. In fact, a lot of them are quite powerful, I'll be honest. We then move on to the various equipment and vehicles, and while some of them are going to be familiar, like the auto pistol and assault rifle, some of them will be less familiar, such as the sharpened metal shard and the improvised sword, which can be used during this campaign. Artwork by Sophia Michailidou, as usual. She's done a fantastic job of the laser cutter, the flamethrower. The artwork at the front is not by her. We actually brought on board an artist for this specific game, who I think was absolutely perfect for the feel. He did this image first, and I was 100% sold. This is exactly the kind of feel that I wanted for this. And I'm going to very quickly look up his name because I've totally forgotten what it is. It is, of course, Jonas Spokas. Of course it is. Yes, he did a brilliant job. Now, once we've gone through the equipment, we also talk about the armor. Now, there's no heavy armor in this campaign. It's set in the 212 CE, 10 years after the Bug War ended. There is light and there is medium armor, and that's it. There are various pieces of equipment, but it's a fairly limited selection of what's available on the Sadoko. And finally, in the equipment section, we then go through detailed maps of every single location on the Sadoko, and also of the Cassandra, your rescue ship. And for each one, you've got here a map of the Sadoko, which links everything together. And then each page that follows is a map. I decided to turn this sideways. So here's a map, and here's an explanation of what you're going to find on that map, and what the current status is when you walk in. So the layout is on the left here, and on the right here, there's the current status. So all of the systems are shut down, and you'll find this and this and this. This is all player friendly. So all of this is stuff that players will notice as they walk in. And there are a number of locations that I'm sure you're seeing as I'm flicking through, vary from security, engineering, and the bridge, to the medical wing, and the docking bay where I started. Crew quarters there. They're actually set up in the order that you'll encounter them if you follow through the campaign. So that's the reason behind the ordering there. Now, I talk about the rules. So the extra stuff is the survival horror rules for Era of the Consortium, which includes salvage rolls, improvised weapons, equipment damage and repair, sleeping rough, and all the things that you need in order to play. Equipment durability and usability there as well. So then I move on to the GM section, which I should say this was originally intended to be a 5-session campaign. And it grew from that after a little bit of information about what makes it survival horror and a few things about weapon noise and how you should be careful about that. We've also then got the GM characters and an explanation of them. And then we go on to the missions. So there's mission 1, then there's mission 2, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, 3.1, well, and a mission 2 epilogue, I'm sorry. So there are effectively 4 sessions per mission. So mission 1 only has 1 session, mission 2 has 4, that's 5 in total. Mission 3 has 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and epilogue. So that's 9 in total. 4 also has a 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and epilogue. So that's 13. And then mission 5 has a 1, 2, and 3, which is, I said it was 9, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then a final epilogue, 17 sessions in this book. We've got a worked example for salvaging. And then we've got some bestiary entries. We've got the Bag Kid, a Warrior, a Grabber, Slicer, Assassin, Brute. So there are various ones there. And then we've got the various reserve characters that you might run into. This campaign is pretty lethal. So there are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 options. No, I can't count. There are 8 options. I'm sorry. However, there are only 4 actual characters intended that you will run into. So you'll be able to make a choice each time between someone who is more a techie or a medic and someone who is more combat focused, so that you can replace the person who you have lost. Character sheets for each of those characters all the way through here. A story index, a gameplay index, and then a specially themed character sheet, which includes the durability stuff that you need for this campaign. And that's Revival. So the intention of Revival is that you can actually also play any other Era of the Consortium session with a sort of survival horror element to it. So that gives you this opportunity in order to play. Now, Revival comes in both paperback and hardback. This obviously is the one which goes with the expansion set. Now, this is identical to the paperback. There are no extras in this. It is the same book, 150 pages long, which means happily that it actually is almost exactly the same length as the Consortium Expansions Volume 1, and it sits very nicely next to it on the shelf, which to me is quite an important factor. I like looking at my books on the shelf, and I think other people, if they're buying hardback or paperback books, they should have the opportunity to do so. Next, I'm going to talk about the time travel campaign. So I'm going to talk about all 3 of these books all at the same time. And I'm not going to take too long over this because we're 2 hours into the live cast now, not including technical issues. And I don't want people to have to sit around for too long listening to me talk. So the time travel campaign offers a unique setting where you are sent back in time, Terminator style, with no equipment, nothing except what's in you and in your abilities, and inside your body you have limited implants. And there are 5 characters accounted for in this. And what I've done, thanks to a little help from Graham Penman, who helped me write these up, what we've done is we've written a single page of story to introduce the session and what you're going to experience. We've written a single page of session briefing for each session. And then we've written at the other end of the book, we've written a single page for the GM of session summary, so what's going to happen during the session, and then a single page of routes to success, which explains how you might succeed at this particular session, things you might go about if the players are having trouble figuring it out. Finally, we've got an aftermath in most sessions, which you can literally read to the players. Now, this first book covers 2 generations of time travelers who are trying to get history back on track. From the very beginning, they assassinate Benjamin Hayden. And I've talked many times about Hayden Bank already in this live cast, So you know how serious an impact that would have. The shades would never be formed, and various other things would also never happen. Now, that's clearly what they're aiming for, but beyond the first generation, once the second generation takes over, they're never properly briefed on exactly why. So this is a great opportunity to play through a single story, single cohesive story, where you have the opportunity to play as one generation, and then as a second generation, which have similar skills to their parents because they were taught by their parents and educated in those areas of expertise, but also different personalities. This is totally playable with just the Rulebook Primer, if you wish. And it includes the various weapons that you will run into in early Consortium times, along with a first date available, which is a vital piece of information for later in the campaign when you start pushing technology forwards. There's some GM information on scarcity of equipment and about being kept in the dark, and also about flexibility of the scenarios and predicting the future, which these characters are capable of doing. So each of these books contains 10 sessions. This first one contains the first, let me think, when does this one end? About year 62 CE, this one ends. There's actually a year for each session that's mentioned specifically. So 62 CE, this one ends. And then we move on to the next generation, because as you may be able to see from the cover, there is actually an attack on the first and second generations, and they all die. So the third generation are faced with a mysterious enemy who they have to overcome. And through this entire book, there are 10 sessions about the third generation and what they have to do in order to reclaim history and get it back on track, which is very interesting. Again, we've got some new weapons, and you'll find the laser assault rifle, which is featured in the 5th race, actually suddenly becomes available in 84 CE, which is very unusual, and a change to the timeline. Once again, we followed exactly the same structure of 2 pages for the players and 2 pages for the GM, one of which is the story for the players, followed by the session briefing, which they can read. And then the back half shows the session summary. So the session briefing and the session summary don't always contain the same information. What you believe might be going on is not always what really is going on. And we reached the end of 94 CE, 32 years after the first campaign ends. The second campaign will end. And finally, we move on to the third campaign book here. And we're still with the third generation for the first half of this. So the first half of this is still with the third generation, but then it moves to the 4th generation in the second half of this book. So each book is divided into 2 5-session campaigns, and you will always keep the same 5 characters for an entire campaign. And then you will potentially switch it halfway through. So in the second book, you keep the same characters, and you'll level those up as time goes on. And then in the third book and the first book, halfway through the book, when you start the second campaign of 5 sessions, you will then begin to modify. Well, you'll have a new character with different stats and so on. So there are again 30 sessions in this book. And in the Kickstarter that we are doing right now, there is a 4th time travel campaign book that will continue the story of the 4th generation. And all 3 of those books are also available in hardback. Again, there are no differences between these books and the paperback, so I'm not going to go through too much detail on them. They are the time travel campaign books right here. And as you can see, hopefully on the screen, oh, they're in the wrong order. No, they're not. Yes, they are. they're backwards. My bad. As you can possibly see, actually the spines come together to make that time travel logo that you see on the front cover. I don't know if that's too blurry for you to be able to see it, which I always thought was kind of cool. I always liked that in DVD box sets and such. So that is all of the expansion books that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to quickly cover the comics because Shades of Vengeance Comics asked me to. This is Era of the Consortium, The Last Stand of Stiletto Unit, The Sheathed Sword. So this comic goes through the story of Stiletto Unit and how they ended up both in Stiletto Unit and on board the Orion, fighting for the survival of everyone in the Consortium. It's a 12-page comic. Cover art by, well, actually the cover art is the back cover of the main Consortium rulebook. The main art was done by Heath Heil, who did a brilliant job. And it was written by myself and Jonathan Lewis, and lettering by Jonathan Lewis. So that's The Last Stand of Stiletto Unit. It's coming free with several of the reward tiers in the Kickstarter. Counting Down from 1 is a 22-page comic, which talks about how the various individuals in the time travel campaign, how it might have gone if they went back in time, and what happens when time attempts to get its own back. And it has the wonderfully classic line, "Hey everyone, we're planning a murder!" To which no one in a crowded lunch hall reacts. Which is something that a lot of people enjoy about this comic. Anyway, the various individuals set up their traps and attempt to defeat Benjamin Hayden, and I'm deliberately not going to show you the last pages of that, because if I do, then it will spoiler you. Which is the last thing I want to do. It's a brilliant comic. In fact, I think it's one of the best we've ever made. Next, I'm going to talk about the Bug War. And the Bug War is obviously about, well, the Bug War, but specifically it's about the declaration of the Bug War. This was on Kickstarter a little while ago, and we have Haishang Hayden, who is one of the most important characters in the Bug War, and some explanation about how she became this amazing leader of Hayden Bank, despite the fact that she sort of started fairly wild. And we have this character growth for this character, who becomes one of the most important people in the Consortium and actually convinces the Consortium to defend themselves against the Zimians. Again, I don't want to spoil you too much. It's a 22-page comic. It's a brilliant story, and I think you will enjoy it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sticking it under your nose. Now, all of the comics are available through some of the Kickstarter pledges, so please have a look at that. And all of these books are available. The hardbacks are available through the collector's edition. Obviously, the definitive edition rulebook is available through the £98 definitively expert pledge, if I remember what I named it. I can't really refer to that. Now, because I need to actually have something to put in front of you, so you're not sitting staring at the blank table while I talk over the other expansions, I'm going to gradually replace these on the table as I go. So, upcoming expansions. I was asked to talk about this by Will McD. So, first of all, we've got Free Trader. Now, Free Trader is, it's really about being able to trade any equipment, any cargo, and have indicative prices for literally anything that the players come up with. That's something that I've found is not exactly lacking in Era of the Consortium. There are definitely indicative things, but perhaps not so easy to play. as it might be. And Free Trader offers 30 trading posts across the entirety of the consortium. I wonder if I can get a rulebook out. Hang on, let's try this. It offers 30 trading posts across the entirety of the consortium, and 40 types of cargo that you can use in order to actually, trade at those posts. And those are intended as an indicative framework that the GM could work on. You could have high quality, low quality, you could have different things that are similar, and so on. With a little ingenuity, I think pretty much any GM will be able to run a session where people are trading. It also contains the rules for piracy. So how do you disable someone's ship without destroying it? Well, that's a very good question, and it's going to take a lot of skill. And that's actually covered in the piracy rules, which are included in Free Trader. Now, Free Trader will be a 50-page expansion. It's got loads of story. It's also got loads of information about what each trading post in orbit of each planet is like. Many of these planets actually have more than one trading post. So that's quite interesting as well. The differences between the different trading posts and the different prices that they offer for each kind of cargo. So next, I'm going to talk briefly about New Worlds. And New Worlds is another of the expansions that we've already unlocked. And what it offers is there are 3 star systems already in the consortium. However, both of these wormholes link to Damara. They were actually moved. They weren't in these original locations when they were found. But a crew of an independent freighter finds a 3rd wormhole, which is massive. I mean, we're talking about increasing the size of the consortium by a 3rd. I mean, it's huge. And they have to think about what they're going to do with this information in the story. And they've got to decide, do we want to give it to the Resistance, to the Consortium, to try and exploit it ourselves? What are we going to do? Because it could make them rich, but if it's taken off them by the Consortium, it's more likely it'll make them dead. I've actually just been editing and writing some of that story today. I've actually just finished the entirety of the Part 1, Section 1, the story section for that expansion. The rules in this book and the equipment are focused around exploration of new worlds. So there are things about, equipment to help you climb cliffs or take geological samples, information about the sorts of things that you're going to need to know whether a planet is really viable for long-term habitation. So all of those things are in New Worlds, and you'll be able to experience that if you're a backer of this Kickstarter. You'll get it for a £10 pledge or higher. That's pretty much everyone who actually goes for one of the reward levels. The 3rd book that we've unlocked is called Predictive Genetic Algorithm. Now, the idea behind this book is that there's a story where the Eulutians are actually researching what other life in the universe might look like. They don't really know what it might look like, and they're sort of trying to figure it out. As a result, they've created an algorithm that will predict the genetics of other alien races. Now, given that the Consortium keeps stealing things from, well, the rest of the Big Seven, certainly, and many of the other Consortium companies keep stealing things from Gaia Adaptation and Adjustment, including indeed the psionic formula that was in A New Dawn. This is also stolen, and some of the less scrupulous companies will begin to grow various samples in vats based on the engineered DNA. Now, this is going to mean that you are able to construct your own alien race. At the moment, I'm looking at somewhere between 90 and 100 options that you have for the alien race that you are trying to create. That includes things like stat bonuses, like the Zimians have, stat penalties, like the Zimians also have. It also includes personality traits of the species, such as decadent. You know, perhaps they spend all of their money on wealth and riches, and instead of you know, trying to plan for the future, they spend it all on material pleasures. Or perhaps they are lithivore, which means that they eat rocks to survive. They don't need real food or normal food. They literally eat rocks to survive. There are various other options, such as not needing to breathe. And each one of these options has a points cost, which you'll have to pay. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative, and you have to end up back at 0, is the basic idea. And those various options can basically be chosen fairly freely. I'm considering, and I've got to run this by one of my playtesters and see what he does with it. I'm considering saying that there is a maximum negative that you can have, and therefore a maximum positive as well. But I don't want to hamstring people too much, and I don't want people to just have to house rule whatever I make up. So I'm looking into that in some detail, and that's what's going on excuse me. And that's what's going on predictive genetic algorithm just at the moment. So there is, of course, the part 4 of the time travel campaign, which has already been unlocked. After the events of 1, 2, and 3, I wonder what you can expect from 4. I think you'll find it interesting, and I'm very sorry to wave goodbye to Graham Penman at the end of this book. I've got another brilliant writer taking over for part 5. And if you want to join into the time travel campaign and catch up without getting the books off this Kickstarter, it is possible to join our Patreon and get all of the sessions from there, as well as the sessions about a year ahead of where the books are released. So those are the expansions that we've already unlocked. We are now working towards the next expansion, which is called Home Base. Now, Home Base is going to offer you the opportunity to make your own base. And this base is going to carry with it the ability to give you bonus abilities in combat, in non-combat, in doing missions. You might be able to train people to send them ahead, and have them infiltrate ahead of you when you join in, meaning that you'll then have the opportunity to you know, use them as an embedded resource within a base that you are trying to enter by force. It will offer you the ability to have proper medical facilities, and also the option to have a space station or a spaceship, or even a base on the ground which uses oxygen. Now, each of these obviously has its advantages and disadvantages. You know, a space station is very easy to track down. A ground-based location even more so, but the ground-based location doesn't need to have oxygen necessarily. The space station does not need to have engines, which take up a significant amount of space on any ship, and any large ship is likely to be noticed by some of your security. So you've really got to keep an eye out for that and make a decision very carefully about what base you want to have. An example might be the Wallace, which the Claymore unit in the Dyson Stuff podcast have as their home base. So the idea of home base, that'll be another 26-page expansion, is my intention. It will offer you these opportunities. It will give you a number of different ship and space station and planet layouts that you can use, and also around 10 to 12 facilities that you can choose from in order to add to your base. The next expansion, which we have to unlock at £6,500 after that, is the Sirona Specials campaign. Now, that's written by a good friend of Era the Consortium called Egg Embry. and he has joined with me in writing a campaign which is sort of inspired by the Suicide Squad, also sort of inspired by the Canaries from a British comedy series called Red Dwarf, if anyone knows that. And this game will give you the opportunity to, sorry, this campaign, I should say, will give you the opportunity to earn your freedom from Sirona, which is an ice world where only the worst of the worst are sent. However, Chrome Correction, which I mentioned earlier, and I even have the logo here-ish somewhere. There we go. Oh, there we go. Chrome Correction, which I mentioned earlier, are not the most powerful company in the consortium, and they'd like to see that change as much as possible. So they've decided that what they're going to do is they're going to use the assets that they have been given, which is you prisoners, and send you on various missions to improve their wealth and their social standing within the consortium. As you do this, you're going to gradually earn perks, and then eventually they promise your freedom. You may not agree, you may not believe them, but you don't really have very much choice. So you'd best get out there and get solving those missions that they want you to look at. So I'm hoping that that's covered what Will McD was looking for when he asked me to talk about some of the newer expansions. The last thing I'll show you is the various books side by side as they might appear on your shelf. This is the paperback group of expansions. So that's the core rulebook. That is Secret War, Fifth Race, Rapier, A New Dawn, Revival, Time Travel Part 1, Time Travel Part 2, and Time Travel Part 3. So this is the group of hardback books, which don't entirely fit on the camera because they're a bit tall. But here we have the Definitive Edition Rulebook. We have the Expansions Volume 1 book, we have the Revival book, Time Travel Part 1, Time Travel Part 2, and Time Travel Part 3. This is the group of books that you will get in the most if you choose to have the Collector's Edition tier of this Kickstarter. This plus one extra book in here, which will be the Time Travel expansion, the Era of the Consortium Expansions Volume 1, and you will probably get one extra hardback as well, if you choose to add a little extra onto your pledge for it, for the Time Travel Part 4. That's not included in the current pledge. So once again, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that you have a lovely evening. And I hope that that's been informative and useful about what is going on with Era the Consortium.